LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the June 2nd edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. Is it June already, or are we going to have Democratic presidential candidate debates this month? I think we are at the end of the month, so that's something to look forward to. This weekend, I've picked out the 11 best, most newsworthy clips for what should be really informative, interesting, fair use media criticism and political commentary show for you all tonight. The clips come from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States. You want to read my notes and sort of follow along. These are like full of typos and sort of cryptic, but you can kind of see who's speaking in all the clips and what the topic is. If you follow along in my clip list, it'll link I put down in the video description. The source of all the clips is also down in the video description. The political comedy I'm going to start with is on the main topic, which is Mueller speaks on Trump crime. That was the big event this week. Robert Mueller held a press conference, actually spoke. Didn't really say anything that wasn't in the Mueller report, but so few people have read the 448-page Mueller report that it had a big impact. By the way, if you want to read the 448-page Mueller report, there's a link down in the video description to that. I've actually gotten, I think, about 50 people at this point to click on that link down there because, as I've said over many weeks doing this show, if you read the Mueller report, you cannot read the whole thing and get to the end and think Donald Trump should be president. Especially not if you're a lawyer and you know what a crime is and obstruction of justice. I've represented people who were found guilty with less evidence of obstruction of justice or less evidence of crime than is in the Mueller report regarding Donald Trump. That's why I have Mueller speaks on Trump crime as the topic. Like I said, the political comedy clip before I get to the big five corporate outlets is Bill Maher's monologue, where he talks about Mueller finally speaking, coming down from his cloud. You'll see this is the first couple minutes of the monologue. The full monologue, as usual, is available at a clip down in the video, at a link down in the video description. This clip is, like I said, the first couple minutes where Mueller speaks. There's a good analogy, I think, to what Mueller said, and didn't say. And then there's this bad analogy, which I'll talk about after I show the clip. And then there's some jokes about the Trump reaction. One I think is kind of funny. I'll explain all that after we watch this first 2-minute, 21-second political comedy clip from Bill Maher's monologue last week on HBO's Real Time over here.
You see, this week, Mueller finally came down from his cloud and spoketh. You know, everybody's been waiting for him to speak and to testify, and he finally spoke, and what he said was, word for word, "The report is my testimony. I shall not want." That was... So get off my lawn and stop asking me to testify and do anything. Make do with my cryptic pronouncements. This is what he said. He said, I love this, if we had confidence that the president clearly did not commit a crime, we would have said that. Okay, so is he a criminal? Well, I mean, why say it that way? What was his wedding like? Do you, Robert, take this woman? I don't not take her. So Trump speaks in playground. What did he say? No do-overs. I get that, you know? It's a little trickier to say, I didn't not find evidence. So you don't have to leave it to Congress. And when I say don't, what I really mean is don't do. And we just want to know, did Trump work with the Russians? And Mueller's like, you know, it's a little like sex with your ex-girlfriend who hates you, but you're both horny. You wouldn't call it planning, but you both want the same thing. So I'm out. So Trump's Thank you for applauding my breakdown. You know, Trump's tweet about this yesterday was priceless. It started with Russia, Russia, Russia. President Jan Brady, ladies and gentlemen, is Russia, Russia, Russia. And then this guy He'll deny everything all day and then completely admit it on Twitter. He said, I had nothing to do with Russia helping me to get elected. And then, of course, an hour later, he has to walk it back. He said, no, the election wasn't stolen. It fell off a truck. What did I say?
So, fell off the truck joke, okay. I like the Russia, Brady Bunch reference, but that's possibly because I'm kind of old and I used to watch that show. Like I said, there was also a good and a bad analogy, I thought, to what Mueller said. I kind of like the wedding vow analogy where, because I said that weeks ago, and I even showed like a Dan Abrams legal analyst clip with Alan Dershowitz, where they both agreed that Mueller was basically saying Trump obstructed justice, but he's saying it in this weird convoluted way where it's like, I'm not saying he committed a crime, but I can't say he didn't commit a crime, and the Office of Legal Counsel memo from the Justice Department says I can't indict him, or even if you look at the reasoning, because of fairness, I can't even claim he committed a crime because he doesn't have a court of law to fight the charge, and so I'm not saying he committed a crime, and that's kind of like the wedding vow. I'm not taking you as my wife, or you heard that joke. The ex-girlfriend, hate sex with the ex-girlfriend or whatever that, I don't know. Not quite as good an analogy, though I see where he's going, because there was no collusion. There actually was a lot of collusion between Russia and the Trump campaign, but there wasn't an agreement to commit a conspiracy or collaboration because they both wanted the same thing, like the you and your ex with the hate sex thing. But there's no planning, there's no agreement. It just kind of happened that you were both doing the same thing at the same time. Just you weren't fighting each other and you were accepting the whatever. It's not the greatest analogy is the point I'm trying to make. So that's the political comedy clip that I probably overanalyzed. Now I'm going to get to the other 10 actual news clips before, of course, the bonus Dash and Sandy clip at the end. I had one of the commenters. I just got Sandy to get up and turn around. Sandy's right there, lying down, listening to the show. I did have someone comment that people only watched the show for the Dash and Sandy clips, and I should do a full hour of Dash and Sandy clips in the recorded show comments I noticed this week. So you can let me know, live viewers, if that's actually true. And I will have that bonus Dash and Sandy clip. But now I want to have the one real big news summary. Someone said that I am too nice to Chuck Todd. I'm too much a fan of Chuck Todd and his news summaries. The thing is, first of all, Chuck Todd does not write all these news summaries. I'm sure he probably has some executive producer role, but he has producers, and I don't know if he even has an executive producer role, but there's a lot of NBC people who work on these news summaries, even though Chuck Todd is the narrator. The thing I like about it is he gives this live introduction that updates, because the news package that comes second in the NBC News Meet the Press news summaries, it's always a little bit dated because somebody worked on it yesterday, and so it's always a little bit out of date. And so there's a live update from Chuck Todd, and then there's a lot of the primary source material. There are a lot of good clips of what people said, what people did, and then there's the narration from Chuck Todd. It's not that I'm such a fan of Chuck Todd. It's the news summary is very complete, and especially for someone like me who likes to see the primary source material reported. So even though Chuck Todd's commentary narration is in there, you actually get to see it for yourself, and you'll see a lot of that in this almost 4-minute news summary. A lot of the news coverage of Mueller speaking and about Trump's crimes was truncated in the Sunday morning news analysis shows because of the shooting in Virginia Beach. I'm not covering that, but there was a lot of coverage of that. And a lot of the news programs started off with that, including NBC News' Meet the Press, but they still had an almost 4-minute news summary that followed their news summary about the shooting in Virginia Beach in the clip you see here.
Turning now to the Russia investigation. Robert Mueller never mentioned the word impeachment on Wednesday, but it informed much of his 9-minute appearance and much of the reaction that followed. The key moment, of course, was when the special counsel said that if his team had felt confident that the president had not committed a crime, they would have said so. That Mueller's team did not, and that Mueller went on national television to say that they did not, had two immediate implications. One, it was a direct rebuke to President Trump's no collusion, no obstruction mantra, which is continuing even this morning. and to Attorney General William Barr's decision to clear Mr. Trump of a crime. 2, Mueller's first and perhaps last public statement on the report was seen by many as a broad hint to Congress that it has an option. It's called impeachment. But Mueller's late-in-the-game appearance also led many to wonder, should he have spoken sooner when he turned over his report? Could he have prevented Barr from framing the public's understanding of its conclusions had he done that? And what if Mueller had said clearly then what he seems to be saying coyly now, that he believes President Trump committed a crime? So Congress, it's your move. Still, Mueller's implicit suggestion that Congress can act if it chooses to has led an increasing number of House Democrats and presidential candidates to conclude if impeachment now is the process, the time to start it is right now.
If we had had confidence that the president clearly did not commit a crime, we would have said so.
Special counsel Robert Mueller closing the door on his own investigation and making it clear the decision on whether to take further action against the president now rests with Congress.
The opinion says that the Constitution requires a process other than the criminal justice system to formally accuse a sitting president of wrongdoing.
President Trump responded, renewing personal attacks on Mueller, including discredited conflict of interest charges.
I think he is a total conflicted person. I think Mueller is a true never-Trumper.
And now Attorney General Bill Barr is distancing himself from the Mueller report entirely.
We didn't agree with the legal analysis, a lot of the legal analysis in the report. It did not reflect the views of the department.
Mueller's public statement is accelerating calls by 2020 Democrats to begin impeachment proceedings now.
Bob Mueller was essentially referring impeachment to the United States Congress.
The message really is over to you, Congress.
I know the politics of this is problematic, but this is a very deeply principled moral moment in America.
But Speaker Nancy Pelosi is still making it clear she believes it's not the time.
The report lays out 11 instances of possible obstruction of justice by the President of the United States.
Mr. Trump, pivoting away from the impeachment debate, has returned to a subject that unites his base, immigration. First teasing.
This is a big league statement, but we are going to do something very dramatic on the border.
Then on Twitter, announcing a 5% tariff on Mexican goods unless migrants coming through Mexico stop, with the rate increasing each month up to 25% by October, but offering no clear benchmarks for success. The president has issued empty threats on immigration before.
We're closing the border. They'll close it, and we'll keep it closed for a long time. I'm not playing games.
With an election year approaching, Mr. Trump is frustrated he has not been able to keep promises to his base to decrease illegal immigration. Many Republicans are panning the new move, calling it a misuse of presidential tariff authority, misguided, and saying this isn't the right path forward.
Why did the president blindside his own party with this?
The president didn't blindside his own party. If Republicans weren't aware, then they haven't been paying attention.
And joining me now is the acting White House Chief of Staff, Mick Mulvaney.
And I will have a couple clips of the acting White House Chief of Staff, Mick Mulvaney, coming up. One clip I won't have is one where Chuck Todd asks him if if this whole Mexico tariff thing was a way to distract the country from what Mueller said and change the subject. He said no, of course, but I think that there's quite a possibility that that's true. And then also there's a clip where Chuck Todd actually asked him, why are you still acting chief of staff? And that was a question I had, which he's saying, oh, just because I'm not working so much at OMB, but maybe I'll go back there at some point. But anyway, like I said, I thought that was a really good news summary. A lot of the primary source material was in the pre-recorded package there. ABC's this week, Fox News Sunday had a news summary, but they never mentioned the Mueller press conference in their news summary from the week. In the teaser that comes before Chris Wallace says, hello again, and actually today they're coming from Dubuque, Iowa, because right now they're having a Fox News town hall with Kirsten Gillibrand, but she's not one of the guests on this show, and their news summary is all about the tariff stuff and saying that Trump is dominating the news. And, of course, the UK visit. I think I had some extra European viewers waiting to watch the show as live viewers because Trump was about to land in the UK right before I think he may be landing in the UK right now as I'm broadcasting. And so, and I think that Fox News is doing a lot to make Trump try to look more presidential. And of course, doing foreign policy is something presidents do, and it makes Trump look like he's actually president. Although he did a bunch of things that kind of messed things up. They mentioned one thing with the whole Boris Johnson thing in this Fox News story, to their credit, I guess, the Kevin Corke story, because Chris Wallace does a brief intro and then gives it to their reporter, Kevin Corke. But nothing about the whole Meghan Markle nasty American princess, or he said nice things about her being an American princess, but first said, I didn't know she was nasty when he found out that she said some anti-Trump things. And I'll talk about all that a little more after you watch this news summary from Fox News Sunday this morning from Dubuque, Iowa. A little under 3 minutes, which we can watch together over here.
And hello again today from the University of Dubuque, home of the Spartans. And tonight, the site of our town hall with Senator Kirsten Gillibrand on Fox News Channel. We came to the masterpiece on the Mississippi, as it's called here, to get a sense of where the Democratic race stands here in Iowa, site of the first in the nation caucuses in just 9 months. But President Trump continues to dominate the news this week with his surprise plan to use tariffs to pressure Mexico to stop the flood of migrants to the U.S. border. In a moment, we'll speak with White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney. But first, Kevin Corke is live in London ahead of the president's state visit to the UK tomorrow. Kevin.
Chris, the president's latest visit here to the UK comes at a time of political change here. As you know, Theresa May, the British Prime Minister, will very soon be stepping down from her post. But it also comes amid growing political headwinds back home, as there are now some Republicans that are panning the president's latest tariff threat. President Trump's visit to the United Kingdom couldn't offer a more stark contrast as he prepares to meet both Britain's longest-serving monarch and its soon-to-be departing prime minister. But before arriving, Mr. Trump made headlines here in the UK by throwing his support behind MP Boris Johnson, a favorite to replace the outgoing May, saying he'd make an excellent prime minister. The president also suggested that the UK make a hard break with the EU, a no-deal Brexit with no $50 billion fee, adding that the U.S. could quickly make a deal with the UK to help soften the blow. Back in the States, tariff talk dominated the week, with the president threatening to hit Mexico with escalating tariffs if the country didn't end its, quote, passive cooperation with the mass migration from Central America through Mexico to the U.S. southern border. The tariffs would go into effect June 10th, climbing monthly in 5% increments all the way up to 25% by October 1st.
We're asking Mexico to enforce their own laws to help stop the people coming in from Central America.
But the president's approach, linking mass migration with drug trafficking and now trade policy, is drawing sharp criticism from members of his own party. Iowa Senate Republican Chuck Grassley called it a misuse of presidential tariff authority. Fellow Iowa Senator Joni Ernst said the livelihoods of Iowa farmers and producers are at stake. All with the USMCA hanging in the balance. On Wednesday, Chris, we expect the foreign minister of Mexico to be in Washington for a meeting with his counterpart, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, as the two sides try to tamp down that tariff threat. Chris?
Kevin.
And like I said, I pretty much pre-criticized that clip, although the one positive thing, and this is the thing, one of the reasons I justified watching Fox News as much as I did for so many years. I still watch some, not as much as I did when I made weekly Fox News bias videos, or maybe every couple weeks I made them. But and it's actually better for my mental health not to watch as much Fox News as I used to watch. But one thing they're good at doing is reporting on, what's going on inside the Republican Party, because they are kind of the communications arm of the Republican Party, or these days, especially with Trump as president, there's this weird synergy where is he controlling what they say on Fox News, or is what's they're saying on Fox News, controlling what Trump thinks, and sometimes it's hard to tell the difference. It's almost like if, what if Fox News ran the presidency? Is like, I've thought of making a video about that, because in some ways Fox News is sort of running the presidency. But like I said, the reason I used to like or would justify watching it is because they know a lot about what's going on inside the Republican Party, and that's an important thing to know when Republicans have power, and they have a lot of power right now. So they may not be an unbiased news source, but they do have some journalists, and they do have good sources amongst Republicans, because they're basically a communications arm of the Republican Party, which I said before. And now I'm going to move on to the newsmaker clips, because those were the only real news summaries. There's a brief news summary at the beginning of this next clip from George Stephanopoulos on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. He had on both Adam Schiff and Jim Jordan. Adam Schiff, the head of the Intelligence Committee, Jim Jordan, leading Republican, defending Donald Trump, used to be one of the leading people against Hillary Clinton because of Benghazi, and he's totally switched on so many things. But that's the clip after next I'm going to show. This is Adam Schiff talking to George Stephanopoulos about whether Mueller should testify, and in my notes it says dirty, but it says this is his final duty, his last duty that he has to perform is to come and testify and explain to the American people that, like I said at the very beginning, and you saw in the Bill Maher monologue, Trump did not commit a crime, wink wink, nudge nudge, if you get what I'm meaning here. And Adam Schiff talks about that, and just the general idea of impeachment, which I'll talk about a little more with you after we watch that clip together over here.
The opinion says that the Constitution requires a process other than the criminal justice system to formally accuse a sitting president of wrongdoing.
The opinion says you cannot indict a president while he's in office, but he could have reached a decision as to whether it was criminal activity.
Very different views there from William Barr, Robert Mueller. We're going to talk about that now with Congressman Adam Schiff, the chair of the House Intelligence Committee. Chairman Schiff, thank you for joining us this morning. I know you're coming to us from San Francisco this morning, site of that state convention yesterday. And I want to start by showing everyone House Speaker Nancy Pelosi speaking to that convention and almost getting drowned out by these calls for impeachment. Let's listen.
The report lays out 11 instances of possible obstruction of justice by the President of the United States.
Now, you've been supporting the Speaker as she holds the line against impeachment, but the pressure is building. Can you hold the line?
Well, look, I think we're going to do what's right for the country. And at this point, the Speaker has not reached the conclusion, and I haven't either, that it's best for the country to put us through an impeachment proceeding that we know is destined for failure in the Senate. Now, that calculus may change if the president continues to stonewall, if the president continues to demonstrate his unfitness for office. There may be little additional cost to going through that process. It is, in a way, even if unsuccessful in the Senate, the ultimate form of censure in the House. But we're not there yet, and I think if it is a close call, close calls go against putting the country through that. We have an important legislative agenda to try to advance. We have important oversight work we can do outside the context of impeachment. And I think at this point that is still the preferred course.
But it could still strengthen your hand against the Department of Justice in court. And opening an inquiry is not the same as reaching a final judgment on impeachment. Why does the evidence laid out by Mueller require at least opening that inquiry?
Well, of course, Mueller didn't say that what he was presenting required impeachment. In the same way, he didn't comment on the question of indictment. And by the way, I think Bill Barr is completely disingenuous in saying that it would have been perfectly fine for Mueller to say the president was a criminal. I just can't indict him. If that's the way Barr feels, then perhaps he should let the Southern District of New York know that they can say individual one, the president of the United States, should be charged when he leaves office. But in terms of the impeachment process, it's not mandated by the Constitution. We can avail ourselves of this when the president demonstrates acts that are high crimes or misdemeanors. It is certainly true. I think that much of his conduct qualifies for that. But at the same time, we have to recognize that the reality that one party, the Republican Party, has turned itself into a cult of the president's personality and is not likely to act consistent with its constitutional obligations. And we have to figure out in that context, is this the right thing for the country? And I'm just not convinced, not yet, that that's the case.
What might help there is hearing from Robert Mueller before the Congress would.
And actually, I kind of introduced the next clip instead of that clip you just watched. The next clip is about whether Mueller should testify in his final duty, and the stuff I said before the last clip mostly. That last clip was about whether Trump should be impeached, as you just saw, and especially you saw in that ABC clip something you also saw in the NBC News Meet the Press news summary. The California Democratic Party, I'm here in California in Sacramento, but in San Francisco they held, the California Democratic Party held its convention. And when Nancy Pelosi was speaking, you saw several people in the crowd. I don't know if they represent the whole crowd, which the media seems to think that when people, like a few people boo or yell something, it represents the what everyone in the crowd thinks, which isn't really necessarily true. And the California Democratic Party is actually not that far left a party. That the Republicans have lost a lot of power because the Democratic Party here in California is actually pretty diverse. There are Democrats that represent districts that used to be Republican, and they're kind of middle of the road, almost like blue dog Democrats in a lot of parts of California, especially the ones that like just one in Orange County. And Ami Bera, my member of Congress, is a very centrist Democrat, much too centrist for me these days, I have to say, on several issues. So the California Democratic Party, there are a lot of Democrats here who aren't that liberal. And so I thought it was the whole way that the California Democratic Party convention in San Francisco was portrayed in the media, especially the few people who yelled about things, wasn't quite fair. But you saw in the Meet the Press story, and you just saw in that last clip, George Stephanopoulos asking Adam Schiff about the people who were chanting "impeach, impeach, impeach," and I actually almost made that the title of this video instead of Mueller speaks on Trump crime. Just impeach exclamation point, impeach exclamation point, impeach exclamation point. Could have been the title, except I think that's too. It's a slogan, but we really need to start an impeachment inquiry, which I don't think Adam Schiff was against there. James Clyburn, in the last clip I'm going to show you before the bonus Dash and Sandy clip, actually makes some news talking to Jake Tapper about his belief that Trump will ultimately be impeached, but you can wait for that clip. The next clip is the one I kind of introduced by mistake before the last clip, where Adam Schiff talks about whether Mueller should testify and it being his final duty, and I'll talk about that a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
What might help there is hearing from Robert Mueller before the Congress. Where do things stand with getting his testimony?
Well, I was disappointed to see during his statement the other day such a profound reluctance to testify. Now, I understand that, but I think he has one last service to perform. It's not enough merely to speak for 10 minutes and say, I'm not going to answer questions for the Congress of the American people. There are a great many things that are not in the report. We want to find out what happened to those counterintelligence findings that were sent back to headquarters. What other things did you learn during the investigation that ought to concern us in terms of whether the president is vulnerable to influence from Russia? Does the president still, did you find evidence whether the president still intends to build a Trump Tower in Moscow? Is that why that financial inducement, why the president can't criticize Putin or take adequate steps to protect our elections? There are any number of questions that we have every right, the American people have every need to answer, have answered here. So I hope that Bob Mueller will understand, as painful as it may be and as much as it may subject him to further abuse by the White House, he has a final duty here to perform, like any other witness. And it's my hope that he will do so, and it's my hope that he will do so voluntarily.
And if he doesn't subpoena?
Well, it will be my recommendation, yes, but I hope that is not the case. That will be a decision, really, that we'll have to make collectively and with our leadership whenever there's use of compulsion, because it may lead to litigation. But I would hope none of that is necessary. That's not how this process for Bob Mueller should end. He's a dedicated public servant, and I hope that he'll come and testify voluntarily.
So that is the clip there where it looks like the Democrats are going to make Mueller testify if Adam Schiff is a member of the leadership, not as high a member as James Clyburn, the clip I'm going to show at the end that I talked about before that clip. James Clyburn is the number 3 Democrat in the House leadership, just right behind Nancy Pelosi as the Speaker of the House and Steny Hoyer as the House Majority Leader, and then James Clyburn is the House Majority Whip, number 3 Democrat. You'll see in the final clip with Jake Tapper, 4.5 minutes long at the end, where he explains exactly, or at least Jake Tapper, you'll see, locks him in on saying that he thinks ultimately Trump will be impeached. And I think that was in some ways better than what George Stephanopoulos does in this next clip, where he starts off, I have to give him, this could be like the question of the week, the clip of the week. George Stephanopoulos asks the question. It's not exactly the way I would. He says the number 4 when I would say 3, but he says there are 4 counts of obstruction of justice that Mueller says there's substantial evidence that Trump committed all 3 counts, the obstructive act, the intent, and the nexus, or he says the connection to a judicial proceeding. Those are the elements of obstruction of justice. And it doesn't require it to be successful. Even an attempt to commit obstruction of justice is a crime if you read the statute. I've got all the statutes down in the video description. I have a Congressional Research Service whole big long document study on what obstruction of justice means. If you really want to know what obstruction of justice means, to go with your reading of the Mueller report, also down in the video description, so you know that our president did commit crimes, not to mention in the Southern District of New York, where he's individual 1, candidate 1, who conspired with Michael Cohen to commit campaign finance crime, felony. So that's another whole set of Trump crime. The whole cover-up of the Stormy Daniels affair, and the payoff to make sure it didn't come out before the 2016 election, that's a whole other set of crimes. But anyway, this next clip is George Stephanopoulos pointing out 4 counts of obstruction of justice. If you know, some weeks back I showed you that chart from Quinta Jurasek. I'm not sure how you pronounce her last name. I apologize for that, but she put out this great chart showing the 10 different areas of obstruction of justice and how much evidence Mueller found in each of those areas. And there are actually 3 where if you look at the chart, it's like substantial evidence of the obstructive act, substantial evidence of the nexus to a judicial proceeding, and substantial evidence of intent. That's like ding, 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 all 3. There are only 3 of those. That doesn't mean there are only 3. It means that some of them actually need more investigation by Congress. But I think that George Stephanopoulos does a good job of bringing that topic up, but not such a great job of following up in his questions, as I'll discuss with you after we watch that back and forth between George Stephanopoulos and Jim Jordan, Republican leading defender of Trump. And you'll see his defense is bogus. Let me look at my notes here real quick. This is clip number 6. And when George Stephanopoulos asks him if there's been obstruction of justice, these 4 counts, which I think is really 3 that are totally proven already, he says, well, he took all this time and all this money and all these people, and he didn't find collusion? I don't know. That's even kind of bogus, but I'll talk about all of that a little more after we watch that ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos, clipped together over here.
In the meantime, we've also heard from Robert Mueller. He laid out 4 incidents in the obstruction of justice section of the report that met all 3 criteria for obstruction of justice: an obstructive act, connection to an investigation, corrupt intent. Does that concern you?
Look, Bob Mueller had 22 months, $30 million, 19 lawyers, 40 FBI agents, 500 witnesses, 2,800 subpoenas. If he could have established obstruction, he would have done it. He couldn't do it. That wasn't his finding, regardless of what the Office of Legislative Counsel told him at the Department of Justice, what they can do with the sitting president or not. If he could have established obstruction of justice, he would have done it. He didn't do it. Bill Barr said that there was an obstruction of justice. Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein said the same darn thing.
Well, that's not what Robert Mueller said, though, and he laid out the evidence. Are you concerned enough to take a look at the evidence?
No, I've read the report. I'm looking at the evidence. But what I want to look at, and this is what Bill Barr wants to look at, this is what John Durham is now charged with finding. I want to look how this whole thing started. I want to look why they put someone next to George Papadopoulos, someone pretending to be somebody else, this Azra Turk individual, to find out what was going on. I want to learn about that. I want to learn about why they didn't tell the FISA court. This is something I want to ask Bob Mueller if he ever comes and testifies. Did you actually explore the dossier? They took the dossier to the secret court, didn't tell the court the Clinton campaign paid for the document, didn't tell the court the guy who wrote it, Christopher Steele, had told the FBI he was desperate to stop Trump. So I want to find out about that, and I know Bill Barr wants to as well, and that's why he's doing the investigation he's doing.
They did say that there was indication of political motive behind the funding the dossier, but you just said you wanted to hear from Robert Mueller. So you believe he should testify?
I mean, that's up to Jerry Nadler. I know this. I got questions for him. I think the one question most Americans want to know: when did you first learn there was no obstruction, or no collusion? The central charge of Bob Mueller, his central task was to find if there was any collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia.
He says he didn't look at collusion. That's not what he said. When he spoke in his report, it says very clearly he didn't examine that question. What he did say is that he could not establish a conspiracy between the Trump campaign and Russia.
So when did you know there was no conspiracy, no coordination, call it what you want. Those have been interchangeable for the last 2 years. So when did you know there was no conspiracy between the Trump campaign and Russia? We knew when we deposed Jim Comey. When we deposed Jim Comey, he said all the way up until the day he was fired, May 9th, 2017, he told us they had no evidence of any type of conspiracy, collusion, or coordination between the Trump campaign and Russia. And that was after 10 months of the FBI investigating him. That was after putting Azra Turk next to George Papadopoulos. That was after using the dossier to spy on the Trump campaign via Carter Page. So after 10 months, if they couldn't establish collusion, how long did it take Bob Mueller? And if you learned this early on, why did you wait almost 2 years before you told the country that there was no conspiracy between the Trump campaign and Russia to influence the election? After all, that was your central focus, your central task of this entire special counsel investigation. So that's a question I think the whole country has for Bob Mueller.
He didn't bring an indictment of Roger Stone until the end of the process. You don't know that he had reached that conclusion early.
But I do know what Jim Comey told us, and he said after 10 months of the FBI looking into this, they had no evidence of any type of coordination, conspiracy, or collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia to impact the 2016 election. So after 10 months, he didn't know. How long did it take Bob Mueller with 19 lawyers? Most of them were Democrats who were out to get the president. How long did it take him to figure that out? I think that's a question most members and, frankly, most people in this country would have for Bob Mueller. So if he comes, that's something that's going to get asked.
We will see if he testifies. Congressman, thanks for your time this morning.
You bet.
So, George Stephanopoulos did a good job of trying to clean up some of the misinformation that Jim Jordan was spreading in that last clip. But so the downside to that upside is that he got distracted by Jim Jordan talking about the dossier, whether the FISA court was, told about it, which they were. Not that it was Hillary Clinton, but it was, that it was opposition research. And, that whole dodge about investigating the investigators kind of worked. And George Stephanopoulos didn't really follow up on the 4 obstruction of justice charges that he claimed, though. Like I said, I kind of agree with that Quinta Juracek, however you pronounce her chart. I didn't have time to put a link in the video description before the live show. I'll try to do that for the recorded show, but here's that image of the Quinta Juracek obstruction of justice chart, where she looks at the 10 different areas and finds which ones have the obstructive act, the nexus to a judicial or to nexus to a proceeding, and then intent. And here's that chart. And you can see there are actually 3 that are red, 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 red. But that doesn't mean those are the only ones where there might be enough evidence. Those are the ones where there's substantial evidence in all 3 areas in the Mueller report. But that means some require additional investigation by Congress. And I'll talk about that a little more later, especially when I get to the James Clyburn clip. But the next 4 clips, like that last one, are all Republicans giving different versions of their defense of Trump, despite the obvious evidence in the Mueller report made even more clear by the, 8 or 9 minute news conference without taking questions that he held, Bob Mueller held this week, and said, I'm not saying he committed a crime, and various other things. Including he began and ended talking about Russian interference with the 2016 election in order to help one candidate. Couldn't even be clear enough to say that one candidate was Trump. But that is what Chuck Todd decided to ask Mick Mulvaney about in the one part of his interview with acting White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney, where he talked about what Mueller said in his press conference this week. And you'll see here that he starts off trying to get him to admit that Russia interfered in the election to help Donald Trump, and he kind of follows up on it, but by the end, with all the dodges that Mick Mulvaney engages in, he only gets him to admit that Russia interfered in the election. And, as a former criminal defense attorney who did a lot of cross-examinations, maybe it's because news people only have a limited amount of time, but if I were cross-examining someone and I had certain things that I wanted to get them to either admit or deny, I'd keep asking the person in my cross-examination until I got that answer. And you'll see in this, not only does Chuck Todd not ask Mick Mulvaney about a lot of different things, especially that Trump committed obstruction of justice in at least 3 areas, and you see George Stephanopoulos said 4 in the question he asked in the last clip. Chuck Todd never asked Mick Mulvaney about that, but he never nails him down on the one question he is asking, which is, will you admit that Russia interfered in our election, admitted that part, to help one candidate, Trump? Never really admits that in the clip you can see over here.
I want to move to the president's response to Robert Mueller. He seems to indicate that the whole Russia interference is a hoax. Does the president accept the fact that Russia interfered in the 2016 election in order to help him win?
I think the bottom line, and this got lost again this week, is that it didn't make any difference. You ask a lot of people about it, show me who you voted for, and I'll tell you how you feel about
That's
Russian
not the question. No, that's not the question. You guys always try to change it to, but no votes were changed. That's not the point.
Fine.
That's not the point. Does he accept the fact that Russia interfered to benefit him?
Keep in mind,
which is what Robert Mueller found.
What happened? The short question is yes. Russia did attempt to interfere in our elections. There's no question. Let's not lose sight of the fact that it was the previous administration that let that happen. Okay?
So what are you going to do? All right. What are you going to do now? Is the president not? Is he going to condemn foreign interference? Is he going to make sure his own campaign doesn't participate in this? Does he want to criminalize foreign interference?
Been doing it for 2 years. Already been working with the states to make sure this can't happen. Again, it's stuff that doesn't percolate up to the level of national attention. But our Department of Justice, our DHS, have been working with states and local governments to make sure that no foreign government, Russia or anybody, has the ability to do what in 2020, what they did in 2016. I just wish people, tried to lay some of the blame where it belongs in the previous administration for letting it happen in the first place.
Very quickly, are you confident that it was nobody in the...
sorry, I didn't. That whole next clip was about whether anyone in the White House was responsible for asking the Navy to hide the ship named after John McCain's grandfather when he visited Japan. I'm not really covering that, but I think I pretty much sufficiently criticized the way Chuck Todd chose his questioning of Mick Mulvaney, and you see he never even really got him to admit that the Russian interference. I think the most Mick Mulvaney admitted there was that Russia attempted to interfere in our election, never the part about helping to help Trump. So that was missing there. And Chuck Todd never really asked about obstruction of justice. Let me see if I can. Hold on a second. See, now I can go to this. I can actually talk while I'm showing you the Quinta Juracek. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that chart from Lawfare a few weeks back, where she analyzed all these different B through K, and then J, of course, has 4 different types of obstruction of justice, where there you can see there's like all the way from no proof to red is substantial proof, and then I think blue and whatever the other color are like, is that like light orange, beige? I don't know. Say to need more investigation, and there are like efforts to fire Mueller, efforts to curtail Mueller, and order to McGahn to deny attempt to fire Mueller, where Trump asked him to write up a false document claiming Trump never asked him to fire Mueller. Those are all cases where there's clear obstruction of justice. There have been over 1,000 now former U.S. attorneys who say that if it were anyone else but the president, the person would have been charged with obstruction of justice. So that was something that Chuck Todd never asked Mick Mulvaney about, even though he's acting chief of staff. Did ask him why he's still acting chief of staff, which that was a good question, and I don't know, that was an okay question. But the only way this came up on Fox News Sunday, Chris Wallace also had acting White House chief of staff Mick Mulvaney on. His only reference to the Mueller report had to do with what Trump said. You'll see Chris Wallace here. He's in Dubuque, Iowa. I don't know. Maybe he's a little confused because he doesn't seem to know what day it is. He shows a clip to Mick Mulvaney of what Donald Trump said last Thursday, but claims he said it today. Because he's obviously coming from Dubuque, Iowa. Just from the audio, he's in some big hall in Dubuque, Iowa, where it makes him sound like he's down in the bottom of a well. You hear that, Sandy? Chris Wallace stuck in the bottom of a well. Go get help. Go get help, Sandy. Chris Wallace is stuck in the bottom of a well. No, sorry, that was if you like the Brady Bunch joke from Bill Maher at the beginning, then you like that Lassie joke. You have to be really old to like the Chris Wallace stuck in the bottom of the well joke, I guess. But here is Chris Wallace questioning White House acting chief of staff Mick Mulvaney about things that Steve Bannon said that contradict what Trump said about Mueller being conflicted last Thursday, not today, over in this clip.
Help us. All right, let's turn to a few other issues in the time we have left. Let's start with Special Counsel Robert Mueller. Here was the president's reaction today to his comments, Mueller's comments.
I think he's totally conflicted because, as you know, he wanted to be the FBI director, and I said no. As you know, I had a business dispute with him after he left the FBI. We had a business dispute, not a nice one. He wasn't happy with what I did.
But Mick, the Mueller report says that that's not true. It quotes Steve Bannon as saying that Mueller, yes, he met with the president, but he didn't want to return to being the FBI director. And it also quotes Bannon as saying on this question of a conflict, which was about an initiation fee at a golf club, a Trump golf club, Bannon said any idea that that was a real conflict was ridiculous.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that. I wasn't really that heavily involved in the transition. In fact, I was coming in as the director of the Office of Management and Budget when those discussions were coming on. And I'm not sure that Steve Bannon is the most reliable source for information about what was happening in the White House during that time. But
he was testifying under oath.
That's fine. My statement stands. I'm not sure Steve Bannon is the best source for information. But look at it this way. The Mueller report is finished. It's over. He closed down the shop this week. You've heard what we've had to say about this many times. It was clear. No collusion, no obstruction. The case is closed. It's over. Democrats want to keep going, and that's fine. But issues like this, we think, are behind us now.
All right. I want to squeeze two more things in. President Trump talks about his close relationship with North Korean leader Kim Jong.
And you see, that was all they talked about. Mueller's report. I showed you the Kevin Corke story at the beginning. With their news summary had no mention of Mueller speaking. There was a brief mention of the Mueller press conference in the teaser before, like I said, before Chris Wallace comes back and says, hello again from Dubuque, Iowa, down in the well where Lassie has to rescue me or whatever. But did anyone else notice like the big reverb in Chris Wallace's voice when he's talking from Dubuque, Iowa? Well, whatever. Maybe it's just me. That's the last Fox News clip, so... Wait, no, it's not the last Fox News clip. The next one is the last Fox News clip. And you can actually see the big room in Dubuque, Iowa he's in this next clip. They come in and this is clip number 9 for those of you following along on my clip list. It's slightly over 5 minutes long. And this is where Chris Wallace has on Doug Collins, who's the ranking Republican on the House Judiciary Committee that would be in charge of impeachment. Jerry Nadler is the head of that committee. And, I said I was showing you all Republicans till I get you to James Clyburn. This is one. The next one is John Kennedy, Republican from Louisiana, the final Republican before James Clyburn. And these are all like really specious, disturbing, disingenuous defenses of Donald Trump from people who supposedly have read that Mueller report. Link down in the video description. If you read that report and then read that Congressional Research Service document that tells you what does obstruction of justice mean, then you have to come to the conclusion that Trump committed crimes. Chris Wallace lets Doug Collins get away with saying no collusion, no obstruction in his answer here without ever contradicting him. Does cross-examine him a little on the disparity between what Bill Barr, the Attorney General, has said and what Mueller said this week on, sort of this he did not commit a crime issue. And then you'll see, well, you can see the issues in the Mueller versus Barr clips. But I think in the Fox News bias area, Chris Wallace is never really saying, is Mueller right? Is Barr right? Even though there's some parts where it's pretty clear that what Mueller is saying is correct and Barr is spinning vigorously for the president, not acting as the people's attorney as he's supposed to do as Attorney General. And anyway, I'll talk about all of that a little more after I show you this almost 5-minute clip of Fox News bias and Republican spin on the Mueller report over here.
Presidential candidate Senator Kirsten Gillibrand. Many Democrats interpreted Robert Mueller's remarks this week about President Trump as an impeachment referral to Congress. Joining us now from Georgia, Congressman Doug Collins, the top Republican on the House Judiciary Committee, where formal proceedings would begin. Congressman, both Attorney General Barr and former Special Counsel Robert Mueller spoke this week, and there were some contradictions. Here they are on whether President Obama committed obstruction of justice.
There is substantial evidence to show that the president was frustrated and angered by his sincere belief that the investigation was undermining his presidency, propelled by his political opponents, and fueled by illegal leaks.
If we had had confidence that the president clearly did not commit a crime, we would have said so.
You side with the Attorney General, and you say that the Mueller report shows that there was no obstruction, but when you listen to Robert Mueller there, that's not what he says.
Well, Chris, good morning. It's interesting for Robert Mueller that he starts from the premise that's so interestingly the wrong narrative for America is that he's trying to take and say we're proving innocence here and that you're guilty until we prove you innocent. It's really an interesting correlation here. I think what happened is that the report is now out. We see the report. You had stated earlier that this was the call for the Democrats to start impeachment. They've been wanting to impeach this president since November of 2016. They've never liked him. They use any excuse to begin the impeachment process. But what we found was no collusion. There was no charge of obstruction. Remember, Attorney General Barr and Rod Rosenstein, who was appointed under Obama, both came to the conclusion, taking under no pretense of any legal opinion, and said that there was no charges to be had when they made their final report after getting it from Bob Mueller. So I think what he said this week was, frankly, it was sort of frustrating for that. He wanted to just basically memorialize what he had already written down. And again, to cause more questions for many of us that instead of finding answers, we still find more questions.
All right. Then there's the issue of whether or not Mueller felt bound by the Office of Legal Counsel, a part of the Department of Justice, by the OLC's ruling that a sitting president cannot be indicted for a crime. Here again are Barr and Mueller.
He reiterated several times in a group meeting that he was not saying that but for the OLC opinion, he would have found obstruction.
Under long-standing department policy, a president cannot be charged with a federal crime while he is in office. That is unconstitutional.
Again, Barr says that the department guideline was not the issue, and Bob Mueller indicates that it was a central concern.
Well, Bob Mueller stated this was nothing new. This, again, has been out for now a while. It was actually written in the report. I mean, a lot of people are saying that this was some kind of a new revelation from Bob Mueller this week. No, it was actually written into the report. We talked about it then. But Bill Barr also made it very clear that when he...
It does contradict what Barr was saying, the Attorney General, when he said that Mueller said that that wasn't an issue, and Mueller says it was an issue. So he at least was setting the record straight with regard to what Attorney General Barr has been saying.
Well, and that's Mr. Mueller's, decision he made it, to do his press conference this week or his discussion about it. But also it's very clear that Bill Barr and Rod Rosenstein basically both said that they did not take that into account when they took the information from Bob Mueller, who, by the way, punted on a prosecutorial decision. He sent it back and said, we're not going to make a decision based on the evidence that they had found. When we look at this, again, the frustration point is the report has been out. Mr. Mueller decided he wanted to end his time and resign and go back into private life. He did so by going up and restating points that he picked from the report that he wanted to do on Wednesday. Look, I respect him. He needs to go back to public life. That's what he wants to do. That's fine. But when we look at this report, there's also many things that were left unanswered on where it started, how they got the information, why they only picked and choose a little bit of the dossier to actually disprove, but yet not talk about the other issues around this. Like when did they stop and find that no collusion actually existed? When did they continue on with this continuation of looking into the president? This is a continuation of a discussion that happened Wednesday that should have ended with the report. He now should be ended. And now, actually, I believe Bill Barr is right in saying, how did we get to this point to start with? This is the critical point because we've had 2 years of basically turmoil caused by a cabal that started at the FBI that we're now actually getting a chance to look into.
All right. I promise I'm going to get to that in a moment, but you have just raised a lot of questions.
The part I cut out there, he didn't really, but sort of got Doug Collins talk about whether Mueller should testify, but he never did anything to contradict the no collusion, no obstruction claims that you heard there. And Chris Wallace was actually one of the ones I almost did a live stream or some sort of coverage of the different reactions from the networks to Mueller's press conference this week. And I was surprised at how many people on Fox News were like, he's actually saying he did not commit a crime, which means he committed a crime. And also, he doesn't say that he didn't establish any conspiracy or coordination, just that there wasn't enough evidence. So basically, so the Mueller report doesn't say no collusion. It says not enough evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that there was an agreement to commit a conspiracy or to coordinate. And the First Amendment actually stands in the way of some of that, because some people in the Trump campaign actually did collude with WikiLeaks to disseminate the hacked material that the Russians hacked from the DNC and, Hillary Clinton, John Podesta, etc. But because WikiLeaks was the publisher, they're not criminally liable because of the First Amendment, although Julian Assange is now guilty under the Espionage Act for disseminating hacked material as the publisher. So that's like a huge contradiction between the conclusions in the Mueller report on whether people who collude in the dissemination of hacked material or collude with a publisher, are they criminally liable? No. But Julian Assange, as the publisher of Chelsea Manning's material, is criminally liable under the Espionage Act, which is a bogus attack on the First Amendment. Just had to add that in as some sort of, that's not really relevant to the Mueller report topic, but just wanted to mention that weird contradiction. And then the final Republican I want to show you here is John Kennedy, not the JFK guy who was assassinated, and that's some other conspiracy theory, not the whole origin. Oh, that's the thing I forgot to mention from the whole Fox News coverage there. So fixated on the origins of the report, or as Trump calls them, the oranges. Well, that was just in one particular press conference, but that was also a weird obsession on CBS's Face of the Nation. Margaret Brennan spent a lot more time talking about those oranges than about Trump committing crimes. Never really mentions obstruction of justice, and this is talking to John Kennedy, and this is kind of I criticize some previous of the news hosts for never getting the complete answer to the question they asked, like not the way I would do if I were cross-examining a witness legally. Well, Margaret Brennan in some ways does like the weird opposite here, where she's like satisfied to get John Kennedy, not the good JFK guy, but this is the Republican senator from Louisiana. She's happy to get him to answer the question, are you confident that Trump hasn't committed a crime? And yes, thank you. That's like a weird part of this clip you're going to see here, because that's her question. Mueller's not confident that Trump hasn't committed a crime. That's the whole he did not commit a crime. I can't say he did, but anyway, I talked about that ad nauseum earlier in the live stream, but Margaret Brennan gets an answer to that, but not much more in her 3.5 minute back and forth with John Kennedy of Louisiana over here.
Good morning to you, Senator. You heard this week, as the country did, from Robert Mueller, who said in front of the cameras, if we had confidence the president clearly did not commit a crime, we would have said so. Are you confident the president did not commit a crime?
Here's what I heard Mr. Mueller say this week. First, I quit. No mas. I've done the best I can. If you're happy with it, fine. If you're not happy with it, call your priest or your minister or your psychiatrist, but I'm done and I don't want to testify. Look at my report. I look at his report and I see the following. Number one, no collusion, so no indictment.
Well, actually, he said it wasn't about collusion. He said no conspiracy or evidence that amounted to ability to prosecute conspiracy.
That's what I was going to get. That's what I was going to get to next, Mark. On the obstruction of justice, he said, I'm not saying the president did it. I'm not saying the president didn't do it. I am saying I'm not going to bring an indictment. You can hear what you want to hear in the report. People obviously have strong feelings about this.
But I'm asking what you
heard. I have never heard.
Are you confident the president did not commit a crime?
I heard. Yes.
Thank you. You referenced there that you think Bob Mueller is done. He said he prefers not to come back and testify. But then some of the people who support the president, including his attorney, Rudy Giuliani, have said that maybe he should. In fact, Giuliani was quoted by the Daily Beast saying, if they allow Congressman Meadows and Jordan and a few others out there, they'll eviscerate Robert Mueller. he would love to have him testify. Former White House Attorney John Dowd said something similar. Are you swayed by that at all? Do you think Mueller should testify?
No, not at this juncture. I don't think it'll do any good. If he wants to, I wouldn't object, but he clearly doesn't want to, and if you make him testify, he's going to say, read my report. Look, the next step in this, Margaret, my Democratic friends have got to make a decision on impeachment. Now, I think impeachment will be a Sisyphean task. It'll be tough going in the Senate. Impeachment polls right up there with skim milk among the American people. But my advice to my Democratic friends is, if you want to do it, go hard or go home. You know, if you want to do it, go to Amazon online, buy Spine, and do it. But go hard or go home. If you're not going to do it, then let us get back to work. Well, I hate to waste a year and a half.
Understood. But in terms of moving on from the Mueller report, you have the Attorney General say he's not ready to move on when it comes to the question of the origins of the counterintelligence probe itself, which, to be clear, was opened after a Trump campaign aide, George Papadopoulos, had some contact with Russians discussing stolen information from Hillary Clinton. So do you support the Attorney General's probe here into the origins of the investigation itself?
Yes. And let's look at the facts. Forget the...
And then there's a whole other diversion into the origins controversy. And Margaret Brennan, to her credit, I did kind of criticize the clip before I showed it, but she did actually bring up the fact that the oranges of the investigation are the whole George Papadopoulos disclosure in the UK about how the Russians are trying to give the Trump campaign dirt on Hillary Clinton, and he pled guilty to lying about that, and well, Michael Flynn also pled guilty to lying about something else that we don't even really know what he said because the Trump administration wouldn't give out information that a judge ordered that they give out on Friday, and that's actually the definition of a constitutional crisis, which I won't really talk about because that wasn't even covered in any of the news summaries or any of the news, but there was a making of news, you know, not just news summaries, but sometimes the Sunday morning news analysis shows make news, and there's going to be news in this next clip. The final news clips I'm going to show you, it's CNN State of the Union, Jake Tapper. I didn't show a news summary from him because the State of the Union had to do with the shooting in Virginia Beach, and Jake Tapper did a bunch of coverage of the Virginia Beach shooting that was good coverage. I'm just not going to cover that in my program today, but I am covering this big news. Like I said, James Clyburn, the House Majority Whip, that means he's the number 3 Democrat after Nancy Pelosi and Steny Hoyer. I don't know if he meant to say that Trump should eventually be impeached because it's kind of ambiguous from the way he says it, but Jake Tapper at the end of this clip, you'll see to his credit, sort of buttons it up like a good criminal defense attorney cross-examining a witness would, saying, well, you definitely said something here today when you said that you think Trump should ultimately be impeached, and that's what the number 3 Democrat says in the final news clip that I will talk about with you after we watch together over here.
Let's turn to growing calls for impeachment proceedings against President Trump among Democrats. Now, you've said that you think that if President Trump weren't the president, he would have been indicted for obstruction of justice. But you also do not support impeaching President Trump. So I think a lot of people might be wondering how to square those two positions. Why should President Trump not be impeached if you think he committed a crime?
But, Jake, I've never said he should not be impeached. What I said time and time again is Mueller has developed the grounds for impeachment. The House has to determine the timing for impeachment. There's a big difference. You know, I was telling one of my daughters earlier this morning, the longer I live, the more I get in touch with what those Gullah Geechee parents and grandparents used to tell us all the time. Haste makes waste. Let's take our times and do this efficiently, not just effectively. All it takes is 218 votes to effectively impeach the president. That doesn't say that it will be the efficient way to do it. What Nancy Pelosi is trying to do, and the rest of us in the House of Representatives, is to develop a process by which we can efficiently move on this issue so that when we get to a vote, it would be something that she calls ironclad, I call effective. And that is why we're trying to take our times and do this right. So I don't see this as being out of whack with what people's aspirations are.
I'm trying to figure out the gauge for your timing. Are you waiting for the public to support impeachment in majority numbers? Are you waiting for Republicans in the Senate to come on board so that he gets convicted as well? What exactly is your gauge here if you support, if you think that he broke the law and would have been indicted if he weren't president?
We think that we have to bring the public along. We aren't particularly interested in the Senate. We do believe that if we sufficiently, effectively educate the public, then we will have done our jobs and we can move on an impeachment vote and it will stand. And maybe it will be what needs to be done to incent the Senate to act. So we aren't waiting on the Senate. We're trying to make sure that we do what is necessary to educate the public, make sure that the public understand exactly what we're doing, why we're doing it, so that people won't misinterpret this as being a political move on our part. We believe that if we do it efficiently and effectively, it will be one that the public will understand and will support. If the public ever feels that we're being political with this, we will have done a tremendous harm to the country, to the Constitution, and to the people that we are sworn to serve.
But it sounds like you think that the president will be impeached, or at least proceedings will begin in the House at some point, but just not right now.
Yes, exactly what I feel. I think we've already begun it. We've got all of these committees doing their work. We're having hearings. We have already won 2 court cases, and there are other cases that are still to be determined. So why should we get out in front of this process? Why don't we just continue to go along? And we are winning this issue. Why should we go out and make missteps and cause us to lose a court decision that will have people saying, why didn't you take your time? Why did you get out in front of this? It's kind of interesting to me as I talk to people, when you ask them what they think we ought to do, they agree with what we're doing. It's just that emotionally, they would like to see something done and see it done quicker. But people want us to be effective with what we do.
All right, but the majority whip there just suggesting that you believe that the president will ultimately be impeached at some point. Thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Many of the brave military men and women coming...
And yeah, Jake Tapper asked a question like, you think that the president should ultimately be impeached or that impeachment inquiry should begin? So it was like a compound question, which is not something you want to do when you're doing legal cross-examination, which I was talking about as a criminal defense attorney, because if you get a yes answer, does it mean yes to part 1 or yes to part 2? And in fact, you can even object if someone asks a compound question. That's a legal objection. Objection, compound question, and the judge will say sustained if it's like a 2-part question and someone says yes and you don't know which part of the question they're saying yes to. But to his credit, Jake Tapper at the end there buttoned it down by saying, so you are saying you think that ultimately Trump should be impeached, and he does. James Clyburn didn't object to that characterization at the end of the clip. So you have the number 3 Democrat in the House of Representatives not only giving you like a long explanation of what the Democrats' strategy is on bringing the public along on impeachment and not getting ahead of things for the courts, et cetera, but also saying, as Jake Tapper locked down at the end there, that Trump should ultimately be impeached. So take that, California Democrats who were chanting impeach, impeach, impeach to Nancy Pelosi. That apparently is the ultimate goal. I don't know if that's something that the House leadership is saying to placate the more aggressive impeachment people, or if that's actually going to happen. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section. And like I said, that's the last clip for the show. I do have a Dash and Sandy clip, and I said that Sandy's right over there. I actually have Dash came and made a unusual appearance for the show here. Let me see if I can get you that. Come on. Oh, here it is. I'll get you that image first. This is from literally this was during the last clip. And Dash is there now, but here's during the last clip. I'm sorry to say, all those papers, I have my clip list. This is show number 319. All those white papers you see around, those are the 318 other clip lists. I don't think I've ever thrown away any. Well, that's a slight exaggeration, but I think that's there are a whole bunch of clip lists there, and and Dash and Sandy are right there right now. But this is earlier, and this is I'm going to give you sort of a political allegorical interpretation of this Dash and Sandy clip, like I did a couple weeks ago, where Sandy represents the Democrats and Dash represents the Republicans. As I'm talking, Dash is right underneath, going right by my feet, and whatever. This is, I don't know, it's because I'm talking, but in my political allegory here, it's almost like there will be blood. I drink your milkshake in this clip, where Dash is, Sandy is much stronger than Dash, has a lot more power than Dash, but lets Dash get away with so much. It's like the Democrats not impeaching, being so slow and deliberative, when the Republicans are just brazen, aggressive, break all the norms, Uberman, Nietzsche, will to power, realpolitik. How many more adjectives can I use, or whatever? You'll see here, Dash is drinking Sandy's water in the outside water bowl. Dash, I'll show you how oblivious Dash is to any possibility that Sandy will do anything about it. Doesn't care. Over in the Dash and Sandy clip over here. That's Sandy's water bowl, but Dash is drinking her milkshake and doesn't care, totally oblivious to any possibility that Sandy, representing the Democrats here, would do anything to flex their powers at all. And I hope that is not representative of, not an allegory of how the Democrats will actually act, but that is what I fear is going to happen in this whole impeachment or non-impeachment, but it seems to be moving in that direction. Maybe the Republicans won't be drinking our milkshake, but you can let me know what you think down in the comment section. That's the last clip, even after all the political clips. That's the Dash and Sandy clip. If you like that clip or any of the clips or the whole Sunday I spent picking out these clips and coming up with my commentary and criticism, give me a thumbs up. Give me a supportive comment. There are other ways to support the videos down in the video description on Patreon. I really appreciate my patrons. Direct contributions through PayPal also available down in the video description. So much going on right now that I don't think I'll have a chance to make that edited, produced video or any of the ones I've been thinking about and talking about for months now this week, but I will be back next week and every week for the foreseeable future, talking about the Sunday morning news analysis shows on the Big Five corporate outlets, giving my commentary and criticism. and I appreciate all of you who join me every week. And I guess until next week, I will be seeing all of you around the internet.